So this video, we're going to talk about files. I'm going to show you how to use ls in Linux from the command prompt to look at files. In general, what ls means. We're not going to go into the details in this particular video. We'll get into the details later. But enough so you have an idea of what you're looking at. Some of the options that come along with ls, what we call switches, that's very important. There are a couple very common options that you need to have in the back of your mind when you're using ls. We're going to look at some of the standard directories and files that you'll find in your home directory and that you'll find on most any Linux system. Now, the key thing is there is a file system hierarchical standard that Linux uses, but it's a little bit different for all the systems. Even though it's a standard, some systems use certain folders slightly differently. Some systems use one folder and not another, but both are required by the standard, so that either could be used by various pieces of software. You don't need to know the details. You can figure that stuff out when you're trying to find whatever it is you're trying to find. But you should have an idea of what the general directories are. We're also going to talk a little bit about file systems and mounting. Mounting is something that is different in Linux than it is under Windows. All right? So I am in my home directory, right? And I know I'm in a home directory because I have the little tilde next to my command prompt, right? And if I type pwd, you see I'm in /root, which for root is the home directory. That's not a kind of, it's a little bit different than a standard user home directory. So what I'm going to do to make this a little bit more interesting is I'm going to create a dummy user who's going to have a dummy home directory we can look at. User add -m dummy. Now if I'm going to do cd/home and I type ls, and now I see there is a directory there for dummy. So if I was to log in as dummy, that would be the home directory I would have. I'm going to change directory into dummy, and I'm going to type ls, and there's nothing in there, right? But if I do ls-a, notice it does list some things. Why? -a is a special switch for ls. It means all. That means show the hidden directories. Hidden directories and files. What is a hidden directory and file in Linux? It means it starts with a dot, with a period symbol. So you see we have dot and dot dot. You should remember those are special directories. Dot means my current working directory, and dot dot means my parent directory. So in this case, dot dot means home, right? I'm in /home/dummy, so one directory up is home. We also have .bash logout, .bashrc, .bashrc original, and .profile. Those are files that Linux uses to set up your shell when you first log in. And if I'm just going to view the contents of .bashrc using cat, and you don't need to worry about what this is, what this means right now. You just need to know that inside the RC file, RC stands for run control, are all the things that set up how your bash should look, how my prompt looks, you know, what my default directories are, all that fun stuff set up in the bash RC file. And if I want to see the hidden files again, the switch is -a. Okay? The other big switch that you need to know is -l. So I'm going to do ls-al for all A, and L is long. And now we see the same list of files and directories, but they're listed long ways. And what we're looking at here are the permissions. We'll get more into permissions later on in this throughout this bootcamp, but the gist of it is, if it's a directory, then the very first spot is a D. If it's a file, that's going to be a dash. A dash just means nothing, right? It's empty. Then you have read, write, and execute right, for the owner. That is, does the owner have permission to read the file? Does the owner have permission to write to the file? Does the owner have permission to execute the file and run it? Then you have read, write, and execute for the group that it belongs to, and then you have read, write, and execute for everybody else. If there's a dash, that means you don't have permission. So you can see here for the group does not have write permission to the ... directory, the directory immediately above. And the group is the root group. So this is the root user and the root group. All these other files are owned by the dummy user, and they're owned by the dummy group. All right. The other important things here, the date that the file was created, right? The name of the file, and then the size of the file, right? That's a quick rundown on ls. So remember, ls, 2 switches, -a for all, -l for long, and I can actually just do ls-l. I don't need the a, but I don't. All the files in this directory are hidden, so that won't show me anything, right? But you can use them separately, or you can use them together. So A shows you all the files, even the hidden ones. Hidden ones all start with a period. And in Linux, that's not like a special thing. You don't need to change anything to make it hidden. You just change the name of the file so it starts with a period. It becomes a hidden file. All right? Cool beans. That is general looking at files through ls. Now I'm going to cd and type / and take me all the way to the root directory. So I'm at the highest directory right now, the very root of everything, and I type ls. This is my file system hierarchical standard. These are my standard folders that you're going to find in any Linux system. And you don't need to memorize every single detail, but you do kind of need to generally know what each of these directories is. There are a few files in here. We can ignore those files. You need to know bin, right? We see there bin. That's your binaries. Those are executables that you expect users to use. So when a user starts a bash shell, when they start a calculator, when they start their web browser, that should be under bin. And then you put that in the user's path. Boot. All the information about booting goes into there. So the commands for booting, the image that gets loaded up from the kernel is in there. And I'm just going to type ls./boot to kind of see the files in there. And you can see the kernel, and underneath EXT-Linux, there's some of the configuration files. If you ever need to change the way Linux boots, that's where you're going to go. etc., etc. That comes up a lot. etc has the configuration files for everything. So if I do ls./etc, you can see there's a bajillion things in there, right? Just to give you a taste of it, I'm going to do cat./etc host name. And you see that is the host name for my machine, Kali. And you can see I am root at Kali. That's shown in my command prompt, but that's where that comes from. If I wanted to change the host name of my machine, I would go in and change that file. All the configuration files go under etc. Everything is in there. All right. You don't, for the purposes of this boot camp, you don't need to become really familiar with it. If you're going to be a Linux administrator, that's going to be a place you spend a lot of time in. This example.conf.json, don't worry about that. /home, right? And if I do ls home, it shows me dummy and root. Those are the only 2 users I have on this system, right? They exist under home. So home directory is where all the user files go. So all the user accounts you have go underneath the home directory. You can ignore initrd.img. Again, that's not something you need to worry about. lib, libraries. All of the universally shared libraries go on there. Again, for this bootcamp, you don't need to touch it. If you ever get into Linux administration, you need to mess around with libraries a lot, simply because lots of different programs depend upon different libraries. To give you an idea of what a library is, let's say that you're writing a piece of code and you need to find the square root of something. It's kind of complicated to find the square root. It's easy to mess up the code. And if you have 10,000 people writing programs for this system, and they each write their own square root function, you know, it'll be done 10,000 different ways. There's 10,000 opportunities for mistakes. It's a waste of time. So what the library is, you'll have one person write it once, put it in the library, and then everybody can share the same code. Because Linux is an open source system and a lot of it is based on sharing code, libraries get used a lot. And then lib32 and lib64, just those are for the libraries that are 32-bit or 64-bit, depending upon your system. Media. Media is the place that your CD-ROMs and often USBs are traditionally mounted. Let me do ls media, and there's nothing in there right now because nothing is mounted in there. If I was to mount a CD drive, it might show up in there. However, on some systems, it will show up in the next folder, MNT. Right? There's nothing in there right now. And that's one of the frustrating things about Linux, is everybody does things slightly differently. And that's why the file system hierarchical standard included both directories, just in case you want to do it either way. We're going to talk about mounting in a minute and what it means, but basically when you put in a CD or you put in a USB, by default, they're going to show up inside one of those two directories. That's where you will access them. Okay. Opt is for optional software. That's going to be stuff that's not on a server, but on a particular person's workstation. So Jim Bob comes to you and says they need this sweet audio recording software. You would install it into opt because that's not part of your standard image. Proc, that's an interesting one. Let's do ls/proc. And these are all the current running processes on Linux. So under Windows, you would use Task Manager to kind of look at the current processes. There's the equivalent in Linux called top. And I can see the running tasks by typing top. And then I typed Q to quit out of that. But if I look at proc, I can see all the same information. It's all in there. Remember the golden rule in Linux: everything is a file, almost everything is a text file. I'm going to say that over and over again, get it into your head. Even the running processes are just files in Linux. It's one of the things that makes Linux very powerful. Again, though, for the purposes of this class, we don't need to get too into it. The root directory, that is a special home directory for root that's kept out of the regular home directory for security reasons. Okay. The run directory, we don't need to worry about that. That's kind of a specialized thing. SBin, that is the server bin. That is where services are started from. You know, your web server, your database server, those specialized things that Linux likes to run. SELinux, that is security enhanced Linux. Not every version of Linux has the security enhanced capabilities. In general, I tell you, SELinux is more of a pain than anything else. But since Kali Linux is a security system, you want to have SELinux on there. I always turn it off, but all your configuration and everything goes in there. SRV is a traditional place to hold your server files. For example, if I have a web server, a lot of times the documents that the web server serves up to clients goes under SRV. If I have a database server, the databases might go in there. That type of thing. SYS is for system files. Let's look and see what's in there right now. So the file system, the blocks, which has to do with the way the hard drive is set up. We're going to talk about that in a minute. The Temp Directory, the operating system puts things in there temporarily that it will delete upon reboot. USR is where user files go, but not user like files that they own, but files that they use. So some executables, some configuration files, but things that aren't applicable to the whole system. It's kind of a weird little thing. Again, for the purposes of what we're doing in this class, you don't need to worry about it. You just need to know what it is. var. That's another important one. If I do ls/var, what do I see? I see the backups, cache, another library, a local, logs. That's why var is mostly important, because the logs go in there. Var stands for variable. Everything that might grow and shrink in size can be put under var. That's why logs go there. Your logs will get bigger and bigger and bigger as they collect more information, as the system runs. And then every month or so, usually you flush the logs and get rid of that information. Spool is for printing. Under Kali Linux, you'll notice www goes under there as well. So your web server is actually running underneath, the files are kept underneath var. And the last thing is vmlinux. That's a VM player thing. You don't need to worry about that. So those are your standard files that you're going to find under a Linux file system. All right. And that's all I'm going to do for this video. I'm going to talk about mounting in the next lesson.